the life of an infantryman in 1776 would be entirely familiar to an infantryman today, or an infantryman who was in Iraq with me in 2003. At bottom, war is always about dead soldiers and sobbing mothers. And that's something that we should never forget, particularly today as we're involved in another war. And when we think about the soldiers who have already died in this war, and we think about those sobbing mothers and the resonances with all of our wars, going back to the revolution, I think are pretty profound.
Art doesn't change, history doesn't change, but how we perceive them changes depending on where we are, the times we live in, and who we are. So maybe in the last year or so, people have seen the movie Casablanca in a different light. Maybe they've thought about the Nuremberg trials in a different light. And now, as we approach the successful bicentennial, we dust off the American Revolution and reanimate it and ask questions that perhaps we haven't asked before. And to that end, we will be taking some of your questions if you put them in the Q&A box a little later in the program. But let me start with Ken, because he always brings up this subject, or we bring it up for him, how it started, how it turned out. You're an historian. We all have our ideas about the revolution, but the last 10 years that you have been working on this have been, should we say, singular years for this country.
They have been, but one of our main responsibilities, thank you so much, Pat, for having me, everyone else. I'm so happy to among the many, many, many benefits of working on this film is as to develop a professional and then a personal friendship with Rick Atkinson, who's beyond extraordinary and a good person. One of the most important disciplines that we have to have is to not spend any time sort of tooting the horn of the present moment, of pointing out how much this past event rhymes with the present moment. Our job is to tell the story. And actually, history does change as we find new things, as we rearrange our focus. Sometimes it's all military, sometimes it's all social, sometimes it's just bottom up, sometimes it's just top down of the boldface name. So we have it's funny that we think of the past as fixed when it's actually extraordinarily malleable. We began this project in December of 2015 when Barack Obama had 13 months to go in his presidency. We finished it, broadcast it last November. There was a lot of water under the American bridge, a lot of it rhyming at different times, as Mark Twain might say, with the current events of whenever it was. A lot of it perpetually rhyming, some of it no longer rhyming. And what you don't want to do is date yourself. We have one of the most extraordinary events in all of world history, our American Revolution, which is beyond complex. We learn so much doing it. We don't go in to tell you what we already know. We go work for 10 years to share with you our process of discovery. And I think this is one of the great stories of all time. And it is coming. It wasn't planned in any way. The fact that it is coming out in advance of our 250th, we say semi-quincentennial. I love everybody's got a different sort of thing. So 250th sounds easiest for me, but it's coming out in advance, and we hope that its complexity, and this is an extraordinarily complex event, as complex as anything, might be able to help us negotiate, obviously, the crises we find ourselves in, of confidence, of democracy, of any kind of label you want to apply to it. Suffice to say, the good news is they were more divided then than we are now. And they were, this was a bloody, bloody civil war in addition to a revolution of ideas. And it's also a global war. And it may be the fifth global war over the prize of North America. So you have right then and there our own kind of superficial versions of the war, of men in Philadelphia thinking great thoughts in 76, and then again in 87 as being sort of reversed by this incredibly long period of time between Lexington and Yorktown, or even beyond that, 2 years and a month beyond that, when the British finally leave and the Treaty of Paris is signed. There's lots of things that go on, and it is beyond interesting, as Rick has known, going 2/3 through his trilogy, and we spent all this time with Rick's assistants trying to bring to life is something that for us seems kind of deeply in the past, and these people can't possibly be like us. They're very much like us.
Hi, I'm Pat Morrison, one of the hosts of America at a Crossroads. If you like this video, don't just watch. Head over to our website where you can subscribe for early access to new programs, see our upcoming schedules, and connect directly with our guests in our weekly live streams. Thank you for watching. And Rick, too, the almost cartoonish cardboard characters with which we regard the past, the military, the good guys, the bad guys, Washington standing up in the boat crossing the Delaware, which is the documentary points out he did not do. How do we bring that into the present day when the state of the American military is so different, to make it understandable, to make people understand that this was war to the knife, brothers, cousins, face to face on a battlefield, in a way, kind of the first Civil War.
It was the first Civil War, as Ken has certainly pointed out very vividly in the film. And it gets more atrocious and more uncivil as the war goes on. The revolution lasts for 8 years. There are at least 25,000 Americans who die, possibly as many as 35,000. It's a larger proportion of our population than any of our wars other than the Civil War. And it is like the Civil War in its internecine qualities. It's brother against brother, father against son. As the war moves into the South, for the last couple of years of the intense shooting war, it gets as nasty as every Civil War does. And there are lots of atrocities by both sides. There's a lot of really deplorable behavior because the intensity of hatred has gotten so great. In terms of relating it to today, obviously today's military is completely different in its weaponry and the quality of the soldiers and the education of the average soldier, as not to mention the officers. But war is war, and the life of an infantryman in 1776 would be entirely familiar to an infantryman today, or an infantryman who was in Iraq with me in 2003, or a GI in Europe in 1944. And there are certain commonalities that describe the realities of war, the awfulness of war. At bottom, war is always about dead soldiers and sobbing mothers. And that's something that we should never forget, particularly today as we're involved in another war. And when we think about the soldiers who have already died in this war, and we think about those sobbing mothers and the resonances with all of our wars, going back to the revolution, I think are pretty profound.